Hey, good morning,
Morning,
afternoon.
Karen. How are you?
Okay, okay.
Oh, now the sun is coming.
Is it?
Yeah, it's kind of peeking through.
Okay, maybe that'll be nice.
Yeah, not so nice before.
Mm.
Okay, is there something else? Ricky won't be able to make it,
Mm.
and I don't think Shell will either.
Okay.
Is he a hoodie? Maddie was at ripped from the headlines. I don't know if she'll be here. Hi, hoodie.
Shalom, Rabbi Poppy, and Shalom, Carol. I can't, again, your eyebrows look great, but
Oh,
that's all I see. Okay.
you don't have to see me. It's okay.
Okay.
Okay. How are all the new babies in your life?
Oh, you mean all my great grandchildren?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Four of them are now in Israel. The family went, the parents went on a through Nefesh.
Wonderful.
They were on that plane that landed in August,
Oh,
late August. So first plane that deposited Olim from Nefesh since the war began. But at the time they made out, yeah, nobody knew that the war was soon going to be over. They were making it in the middle of a war. By the way, Barbara Poppy, how did your talk go today? Were
How
people
did
really
my,
interested?
pardon me?
Were people interested in this topic? I'm really
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a large crowd.
interested because I thought you were really going out on a limb. The last time, remember, we talked about celebrities, and you said that's what the show wants. I said, fine, if that's what they want, fine. But this time, I thought, my God, why would people care all that much about something like that? Interesting.
Well,
oh,
because it raises so many issues, and unfortunately, nobody comes out looking good.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and that's, I mean, I think people have been, I
I
mean,
sent you some stuff
taking up
about
this
it from
fairly,
Horace, and I,
yes, I
yeah,
appreciate it. I
yeah,
shared that.
because
Well,
yeah,
no, one of the articles you
right.
sent me, I didn't have on the list.
Well, you can't share the one from Horace anyway. It's premium, so it's essentially not shareable.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so but the thing that gets me is, didn't these guys know that they were going to be filmed?
Well, they've been indicted, but they haven't
Oh,
been.
I'm saying, didn't these prison guards know that they were everything they do was on camera?
Well, that's partially why in the video, apparently everybody crowded around so that the camera couldn't see. That's one of the I mean, it's
Hi,
problematic.
Maddie.
Hi, Maddie. It's problematic because we don't,
You don't know what the circumstances were.
yeah, the
Yeah,
circumstances were not clear. The military attorney general,
is in a hospital now.
yeah, is in the hospital, suicide watch.
Clearly suicide risk.
Yeah, it's just it's just sad because the actions from the attorney general, the military attorney general, to some of the members of the Knesset, and the soldiers themselves. Nobody seems to, really.
Nobody wants to own up to what's really going on. And
Yeah,
by the way, in America, that's called the Judge Advocate General, known
right.
as JAG for
Yeah, yeah,
short.
right.
Okay, a lot easier to pronounce.
Yeah,
When you're
mag.
talking about this, JAG, JAG.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at our parasha. Hi, Rabbi Zucker. How are you doing?
Good
Shalom,
afternoon.
Rav Zucker.
Shalom uvracha.
hello.
So we're going to take a look, obviously, at the Parashat Chaye Sarah, since that's our parasha. And much of the parasha really is taken up with finding a wife for Isaac, a wonderful story of Abraham sending off his servant and the servant doing a test and who should come to him but Rivka. And, it's a great story, some great lines in there. But it is introduced, of course, with the death of Sarah, which Midrash says was due to the Akedah. She heard about what, Satan appeared to her as Yitzchak, and
You know what your husband is doing with your son.
yeah. So, but it's
But
worth
it is nice. The first chapter centers around a woman, namely Sarah. The second centers around a woman, namely Rivka. And a third brings in Abraham's third wife, Keturah.
Keturah. Yeah. So we're going to take a look at Sarah and Keturah. And see, just some interesting things that one, to see how some of our Meforshim are not shy about disagreeing with each other. But also, how they're weaving in, how the post-biblical look at these characters, just adds, it would definitely veering off pshat interpretation. Although sometimes they, are capturing, some very important details. Certainly the opening, we'll see that there are some insightful comments by our Parshanim. Okay, so the parsha begins, V'yu chaye Sarah me'ah shana ve'asrim shana v'sheva shanim. Now Sarah's life was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Shnei chaye Sarah, thus the years of Sarah's life. So interesting that it begins with the title of Chaye Sarah, because of course she dies, and at the end of the parasha, Avraham will die. But tremendous emphasis on Shana here. She lives 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These are the years of Sarah's life, and that's going to open it up to our Mefarshim. So who would like to begin reading Rashi's commentary?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
Now Sarah's life was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. The reason the word Shana is written at every term equals number of years.
That's what they mean by term here.
Yeah. Is to tell you that each term must be explained by itself. At 100, she was as a woman of 20 as regards sin. For just as we consider a young woman of 20 as having never sinned, since she has not yet reached the age of one liable for punishment, so too at 100 she was without sin. And when she was 20, she was as beautiful as when she was 7.
I think you're missing something there.
Yeah, I think there's let's solve fair there somewhere. I mean, we were members in Yeshiva Katana, and right off the bat, everybody raised their hand and wanted to know what's going on here. Why would a 20-year-old woman want to look like a 7-year-old? And so I think what happened was they reversed. Is that what you're trying to say, Rabbi Zucker?
Well,
you said it
Not
first.
only look, but a 20-year-old had not sinned.
Yeah,
Because
that's
she's not
also
liable. The 7-year-old is
right.
not
So
liable.
you have to turn it around, right? Is that your proposal? Because
Yeah.
that's yes or no?
Yeah,
Okay,
basically.
that's exactly what I wanted to say too.
yeah, I mean, but I think that, they are basing themselves on the verse. First of all, it says 100 years, why, and also why didn't they just say, the Chaye Sarah Me'av Esrim V'Sheva Shanim? Why did they say Me'ah Shana V'Esrim Shana V'Sheva Shanim? I mean, it's an unusual repetition, and they're trying to move from one to the other. That even at 100, she was as sinless as someone at 20. I mean, 20. Again, they're taking this random number. It's not a random number because it comes from the verse. And, at 20, she's not yet liable for punishment. And then,
She is.
Yeah.
I have to say that when she was 20, she was as beautiful as when she was 7. That's a little creepy, especially with what's going on in the news today. But I think they're just building on, they're constructing this.
It's like it got flipped there because, the 100, she was beautiful as 20. And at 20, she was as innocent as she was at 7, is what
Of
it
sin, of
should
sin.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Exactly. I couldn't
And
agree more. Well, Rabbi,
and the hint there is at 20 you are liable because she's bat mitzvah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Mitzvah.
I'm
More
not
than
sure where they
12.
get the 20 from.
it's
That
something, a mistake crept into Rashi's manuscript, which has never been able to get fixed. It's been confirmed mistake, and that's just one of these things. But yeah, in this case, I think it's perfectly reasonable for somebody who sees this to say, since this makes no sense, let's change it so it makes sense. This, after all, is not a sacred text, you know. And the way you just presented it, Rabbi Zucker, makes it make sense.
yeah, this is not this is not the
Because I
the
think in
famous
Midrash
Midrash.
Rabbah, it's got it correctly.
Pardon me? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. So, but they're trying to create this picture of Sarah as this incredible person. So they're trying to give her a eulogy. And then so again, we've got 100 years, we got 20 years, we got 7 years. And then it says, Eluchai Sarah, the years of Sarah's life. Kulan Shavim Latova. All of her years were equally good. And that's kind of somewhat ambiguous. What probably meaning that she was good throughout her life.
It could mean also that she had a good life.
Right.
Unfortunately, the text doesn't make it seem that way. In
Right.
other words, if I pick this up, but there's a lot of times that the Torah sticks a text in that about someone you seem to think you know pretty well, that says something about them that on the basis of what you read so far doesn't make too much sense. Like, well, Ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, Mikoha Adam Asher, Shalom Magid said this in his when he was still on board. Okay, he said, reading the Torah up to this point, what I think that Moshe Rabbeinu was an Anav. I mean, I think a lot of other things about him, but I sure wouldn't think that.
Yeah, humility was the most, So, but anyway, so the fact is, Ramban doesn't really agree with this. And interesting, he seems more after the Pshat than Rashi, which is kind of unusual. Go ahead, Carol. Rashi comments.
Rashi comments, the reason the word years is written at every term is that it informs you that each term must be interpreted by itself. At the age of 100, she was as a woman of 20 as regards sin, for at the age of 20 she had not sinned, since she had not reached the age when she was subject to punishment. And at the age of 20, she was as beautiful as when she was 7. Rashi wrote similarly on the verse, the years of Abraham's life. However, this
Exegesis.
exegesis of his is not correct
It's not correct, period.
is not correct. Okay, this is small. In the case of the verb of the verse, the years of the life of Ishmael, it is stated exactly as in the verse, the years of Abraham's life, whereas these years of Ishmael were not all equally good, since Ishmael was wicked in his early years, and only in the end did he repent of his evil ways.
Yeah, so, maybe this is just, as we'll see, maybe this is just biblical style, because you can't, I mean, if you got the same words, there's always a bit of a problem with the Gzeira Shava when they make a comparison of two verses, this word here, that word there. All these things say Elu, Shnei Chaye Avram, Shnei Chaye Sarah, Shnei Chaye Yishmael, but you can't make the same claim about each of these characters. Okay, Avraham and Sarah, maybe, but Yishmael, no. Now, of course, it's still basing itself on the Midrash, because there's nothing in the text to necessarily suggest that Yishmael is not a good guy. In fact, at the end of this parasha, when it's a beautiful scene when he and Yitzchak come together to bury their father in Marat HaMachpelah together with his wife. Whoops, I didn't fully translate this. Sorry. Va'od, moreover, ki shana lechalek mashma. It's just it's implies to distinguish. Ve'nenu nidrash lahashvotan. And you really can't interpret it, to make them all equal. Aval, shana v'shanim, derech halashonhu. It's just the way of language. This is just biblical style. Um,
You think
Umasham,
you think Rashi doesn't know that?
of course he knows that.
Exactly. In other words, there are times where Ramban basically makes hasagot, that means like corrections on Rashi, which basically are simply on a misunderstanding of what Rashi is really trying to do. Rashi knows perfectly well that this is the normal way of the text. But on the other hand, it's arichut lashon, and a parsha starts with it. And that makes, when you start a parsha with something, it means you want people to focus on it. And so Rashi is, after he's not coming up with this on his own, he's taking it from
Right, he's drawing it from Midrash.
He's choosing to take it because he wants to make a statement about Sarah. And of course he realizes that that's not plain Pashup shot. Rashi says, Vani, but the people don't mean. But that's what I'm going to emphasize. It doesn't mean this is going to be an exclusive. That's a complete misunderstanding of what Rashi writes in the beginning in Parsha Preshit. It simply means that up to him, there was a single parshan who basically made pshat the thing that they were going to emphasize. Okay, Rashi brought that into the world of parshan, made it basically and something. Since Rashi, practically every parshan who came afterwards in the next few hundred years followed his way, and not in the way of the previous parshan and before Rashi.
Yeah, well, certainly his grandson, Rashbam. But also, I think it's fair to say that even the rabbis understood that this was biblical
Well, each
style.
one of these statements from Reish Rabbah represents one particular rabbi's individual
Right.
style. It's not, when you say the rabbis, it sounds like there's some kind of a group consensus here. Nothing like that at all. The whole point in the Midrash is davar acher, davar acher, davar acher. You can have a verse that's popular in the Midrash, like HaChodesh HaZalacham. They can give you 15 different takes on it without the slightest problem. So you have to basically understand that, Midrash has no problem with saying davar acher ad infinitum. Shot does. Okay?
Right. So davar acher, another interpretation, is very common in Midrash, and even to talk about Pshat and Rashi, he's giving you the Pshat in terms of the rabbinic understanding. You have to remember that Rashi's work on the Torah was kind of probably, almost a sidelight because, his incredible work was the commentary on the Talmud, on the Bavli. But anyway, and here, and he velo darshu kein ela mitur halashon. Shechazar v'amar continues a shnei chaysar after going shana, me'ah shana, esrim shana, sheva shana, and then chaysara shekilalan v'ishva otan. Furthermore, the repetition of the word year at every term would seem to indicate an intent to distinguish between them, and thus should not be interpreted to imply equality. So, he's building this up like, later on the rabbis would say, there's a limit to how much you push the midrash. You could say that to Ramban here. Yeah, okay. Now we take a look and someone in the wake of Rashi, Bechor Shor, another Pashtam. And he brings out a very, very important point on what's so unusual about this. I mean, as Yehudi said, it's the beginning of a parasha, but there's something else unique about it. Go on.
It is not the usual way to record the deaths of women, even righteous ones, unless it is by means of a deed. For behold, we find only Sarah, Rachel, and Dvorah, Rivka's wet nurse, and Miriam on the withdrawal of the well.
Again, that's based on the Midrash, that because of Miriam, the well followed the people through the desert.
Sarah's death is mentioned since she makes known to us how the grave was acquired with riches. And this is one of the tests of Abraham. Devorah's death is mentioned to make known how the name of the place is called Alon Bakhut. Rachel's death is mentioned to teach why she is not buried in Ma'arat Machpelah. And why is it that their years are not numbered, except for Sarah, since she is the most important of them all?
Yeah, that's a very, and we see Sarna makes the same comment. Can you read that down there, Sarna?
Sarna, okay. Sarah's lifetime. The span of Sarah's life. The repetition underscores this unique biblical specification of a woman's age at death and testifies to Sarah's great importance as the first matriarch. In his footnote, Sarna lists the traditional commentators who point this out, including Ramban. Here, for example, is Rashbam's comment. Now Sarah's life. Even though the Torah never revealed the ages of other women, in Sarah's case, it became necessary to inform us of this, as her death was directly related to the purchase of the cave of Machpelah. The Torah therefore told us how many years Sarah lived after having become a mother at the advanced age of 90.
Okay, so something that the Mefarshim point out is that this is the only time that we have the age of a woman mentioned at her death, the only time in the Tanakh. And clearly she was an important character. So you know, that's
Do they
what,
want us? Oh, just a question. Which could it also be mentioned because they wanted us to know how old Yitzchak was, that he was 37, which to me is still very confusing. Except that's what he was, but they always act like he's a nar,
yeah, well, I
and
mean, I think
The
they're,
text doesn't say that, Carol. Let's just get this straight. That's what the Parshanim say. The text makes Yitzchak look like he's about 8 or 9 years old. There's nothing in the text that makes you think he's 37 years old. That's a midrashic statement. Just don't, like Rabbi Papi just pointed out, don't fasten the midrash onto the text. It's
yeah.
simply a take on it, which is by some particular rabbi who lived 2,000 years ago, and in no way tells you what the text is saying. Text is not presenting Yitzchak as being 37 years old.
no, I know it doesn't. I mean, it makes it seem like he's still a child.
Because
Yeah.
that's what the text says. So there's no reason why you have to don't let a midrash beat you up, because the midrashim are designed to keep people awake. They're not designed to basically tell you exactly what the text says. If that was what they were up to, there wouldn't be a need for a midrash.
As well, great point, because as we'll see that, sometimes we learn more from the Midrash about the Darshan than we do about the text.
Unfortunately, that's also true about Parshanim.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
So, again, we're talking about women, so worthwhile taking a look at a women's Torah commentary. You want to read that one too?
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
The beginning with her life, the chapter actually focuses on her death and burial. However, the notice that the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah is consummated in Sarah's tent suggests that her life continues through the next matriarch.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely comment.
Absolutely, very nice.
Now, we come to another commentary, which, again, this one we definitely learn more about the Parshan than we do about the text necessarily. So it's just filled with midrashic allusions. Some things in the midrash are so well known that they just become part of they almost become part of the text. So very often when I teach about midrash, I will ask the question, so who was the servant who went to find a wife for Isaac? And everyone answers
Eliezer.
Eliezer, right? Except he's mentioned only one other place in the Torah and not in regards to finding a wife for Isaac. I mean, that's the Midrash. I mean, it's a good suggestion given that Eliezer is presented as
It's a logical
very,
one.
very important. So a very logical interpretation. But,
But in the text, it's called Ever Abraham, and your point is absolutely well taken, Rabbi Papi.
And also, there's also the sense, just to bring up another point, what scholars call flight from anonymity. The Midrash didn't like anonymous characters, so they tried to identify people. Sometimes it's a plausible interpretation, but there's nothing in the text to indicate that that's true necessarily. I mean, they'll find something. So the most famous one we've talked about before is the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the person gathering wood in Shabbat who's put to death. He's not named, but because when the Benot Tzlofchad come forward and say, we deserve our father's portion because he was not one of the
Korahites.
exactly, not part of that rebellion, he says, Kipacheto Yumat. He died for his own sin. It was just a poetic way of saying he died. He was not, but the rabbi said, what do you mean? His sin? Oh, he must be the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Yeah, Midrash. Okay, now let's take a look at the Kli Yakar. Keep going.
Now Sarah's life was 100 years, etc. Regarding Abraham, it is said, now these are the days and years of the life of Abraham, which he lived. Scripture continues to say, which he lived, because he was a lively man of many acts, knowing God all the days of his life. For at 3 years old, he recognized his creator, which was not true of Ishmael, who repented only later in life. In regards to Sarah, it did not say that she lived, because the woman suffers the pain of childbirth and pregnancy, and her husband's will is upon her. So not all her days are called living.
Very interesting comment there.
Yeah.
First of all, as we're talking about Sarah's life, and he shifts the focus to Abraham, but it's a guy writing in the 19th century, or 20th century. What is Kli Yakar?
There are those who say that Abraham did not live all of the years allotted for him, for his days were shortened 5 years, in order that he did not see Esau turn to evil. Thus it says, which he lived. For these are the years that he did live, despite the additional days that were fitting for him because of his character. He did not live them because his days were cut off, as was said.
Yeah. So,
I assume they take the 5 years because he didn't make it up to the 180 of Yitzchak.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, that's right. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Rabbi. Hashem HaRachmanos on him, which, by the way, we ourselves talk like that. When an elderly person passes, sometimes the situation is such that everyone knows that in this particular case, that person's passing wasn't something that was a bad thing for that person. It might have been a good thing because the circumstances would have meant just more years of pain and suffering. So in other words, here Abraham Avinu, the pain and suffering would have been seeing a grandson who went off and was not, went off the derech. Of course, like we know, from a shop point of view, there's no basis for this whatsoever because there's nothing in the text that says that Esau went off the derech. That's
right.
It. But it's really interesting when you look at Sefer Bereshit. You really have a hard time finding people who are really no fooling around evil after the Sodom crowd drops out, because basically they are descendants of Abraham Avinu. So we can't go around saying, "Did you guys get that email I sent last week to you, where the Tosefta gets up and says, how can you say things like that about Yisrael?" That means that somebody who was in Abraham Avinu's household turns out to be a shofet damim, gilui arayot, and avodah zarah. That's ridiculous, So the Tosefta gets up and says, right out straight. I swore I thought you sent the text to both of you.
Yeah. No, we got it.
Okay.
I think that also brings up an important point that we've mentioned before, that the Midrash takes biblical characters and turns them into archetypes. Esav is the archetype of Rome. Hence, he's guilty of all these sins. There's nothing in the text that necessarily assumes that Esau is such a bad guy. I mean, he wants to kill his brother. That's not particularly positive.
But his brothers provoked him something awful. I mean, It's not like he's unprovoked. You know,
Yeah. I mean, the text has sympathy for Esav. And we'll see as we go on, how these archetypes are used. So let's go on towards the end of the parasha, where we have this unusual. Did I miss something here? No. Okay. The next line we're going to take a look at is toward the end of the parasha. Vayosef Avraham vayikach isha ushma Keturah. Now Avraham had taken another wife. Her name was Keturah, which, by the way, is the name of a kibbutz in southern Israel, which was founded by Young Judea. So I was in Young Judea in high school, so I have to give some credit. Now, it's important to realize after they mentioned Keturah, they mentioned her children, and as kind of an historical background, here's what Sarna writes. Maddie, would you go on?
Sure. The sons of Keturah, 6 in number, are to be regarded as constituting the original core of the tribal confederation to which others, grandsons and great-grandsons, later adhered. The name Keturah is obviously related to Hebrew Keturet, spices. There was a universal and sustained demand in the ancient world for frankincense, myrrh, and other aromatic resins and gums.
Yeah, remember they were gifts that were brought to well, we have it throughout the Torah, I mean throughout the Tanakh, but even later in the New Testament, these are the gifts that they bring to the wise men bring to Jesus.
These were needed for the requirements of the cult, for the manufacture of medicines, and in the preparation and preservation of food. The prime source and producer was southern Arabia, especially the Hadramaut region, which is modern Yemen, the most fertile part of the Arabian Peninsula. Because of her name, it is reasonable to assume that the key factor behind the organization of the Keturah tribes was the spice trade, the production, shipment, and distribution of this precious commodity. It so happens that both biblical and Assyrian sources mention many of the names here listed as those of peoples or localities involved in this particular branch of international commerce. They controlled the trade routes that led from the Arabian Peninsula to the lands of the Fertile Crescent. This accounts for the picture of such widespread geographical diffusion of the Keturians from southern Arabia to the middle Euphrates region and northern Syria.
Yeah. So just, Sarna bringing in historical perspective that, when we read of all these different tribes and these different people, all these names, they're significant. They're significant, obviously, because they're in the Torah, but they clearly had some significance for the people reading the Torah. And here, just the background of Keturah and her family is, it's reflecting kind of an economic situation in the ancient world. Now, again, looking at our Meforshim, we're going to see some different perspectives. And first, you have kind of always have to start with Rashi, because he certainly draws on the Midrash, but also, he's like just one major parshan, one major commentator. Okay, go ahead.
Keturah. This is Hagar. She was named Keturah because her deeds were as beautiful or sweet as incense.
Torah. That's we read of the
Keturah.
incense in the Mishkan. It's the Torah.
And since she closed her opening as she did not mate with anyone from the time she separated from Avraham.
Yeah. So basically, she was able to go back to him because she didn't have sex with anyone. She didn't try and marry anyone else.
So who are these sons that she had?
Pardon me?
We just read that Keturah had 6 sons.
Yeah, but they were from Avraham.
They were from Abraham.
Yeah.
Okay, but they didn't carry on. I mean, were they Jewish? Did they convert or?
Well, first of all, there's no conversion, no Judaism in those days. But that, was not the concern here. Yishmael, son of Avram, certainly didn't continue with, it was Yitzchak, Kibi Yitzchaki Karei Lechazara. Your descendants will be marked through Yitzchak. And now we have Ibn Ezra, who, not infrequently does not necessarily agree with Rashi.
Keturah, she is not Hagar, because scripture explicitly states, and to the sons of the concubines that Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts. The meaning of Pelegesh, concubine, is a handmaid. This term cannot refer to a male. We can explain upon concubinage as referring to females.
Okay, so it's got to be a woman, but it's not Hagar, because, and she's identified later on, or seems to be identified as a concubine.
Yeah, well,
So-
the point is if you say Pelegian plural, means that Abraham had two wives other than Sarah.
Yeah,
So they have to be Hagar and Keturah. But, listen, Rashi's just bringing down what Brazier Rabbi.
Right. absolutely.
Now,
So here's Eskenazi and Weiss. That's the Women's Torah commentary.
I can't see the top line.
Yeah.
I can't either.
Oh,
No,
you want me?
we're looking at the footnote.
You're the footnote. Okay, never mind.
Ashkenaz.
Eskenazi and Weiss. Some interpreters see Keturah as one of Abraham's concubines, since verse 6 mentions the sons of Abraham's concubines. Such is in fact stated in Chronicles 132.
And this is the verse?
Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, she bore Zimran and Jokshan
and Medan and Midian,
and
Shua, and so
Shua.
forth. But the point is, Chronicles specifically says the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine. So that's why there's. But then Ashkenazi and Weiss pick up, what other.
Siriavim is fixing a slight dubious or open to more than one interpretation statement in Sefer versions, which Siriavim does all the time.
Yeah. So
they're just looking for stuff for yeshiva boys to study.
Well, that's what yeshiva boys study.
I know.
Yeshiva boy. What do you think we did all day? Yeshiva?
They were yeshiva boys. It's not that. I mean, this is
No.
this is what they did.
I mean, listen, that's what I am. That's what my kids are. That's what all my grandkids are. Basically, that's what we all are. That's tradition.
Sometimes this stuff is just a little bit deeper than, this is not pill. Sometimes it is, but
no, it's not pill. I didn't mean it that way. I meant that in the yeshiva system, you are taught to learn more than one opinion, and basically that doesn't mean that one opinion excludes completely the others. It just simply means that there's more than one way of looking at a verse.
Yeah. So let's see Radak, and he's going to kind of dealing with, are these children Jewish as or Israelite? Go on.
Now, Abraham had taken another wife. He took another wife, although he already had two wives, but continued to take a third in order to serve him in his old age, but also to continue siring children to increase his seed in the world. He was not particular in this as from which people or which clan she would be, because his special child, Yitzchak, was from a wife that was from his own family. And he also married Yitzchak to a woman from his family. He did not worry about from which the rest of his children would be.
Yeah. So basically, he was continuing the line that God had promised him. But the other children, he's just fulfilling the mitzvah of Priya or Via.
Well, I think the text is trying to basically get something else across besides the mitzvah of Priya. The text is trying to get across that. I don't even know at the age of 140. is managing to basically get himself married for the third time and have 6 children. When in the beginning we were being told that Abraham had a problem having children altogether. In other words, it's a reversal of fortune. It's nothing short of incredible. I was kidding around with Judith Halpern one day and said, look at Abraham at 140, he takes himself a trophy wife and has 6 children by her. Look at David at 70, he can't even do what a male is expected to do and perform properly in the bedroom. Okay,
And
that's the
even
Haftarah.
Moshe, one of the things they say about him when
that's the whole
he
point.
dies.
We make our heroic figures that we want to aggrandize. They're still good at the end of their lives.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, women say, "Vada shenim v'rana nim
You, which
you
I
got
kind
it,
of come
Rabbi
to.
Sukkah."
We may have time to come to that. And by the way, I mentioned this to Yehudi once, in Mishner's book, The Source. There's a great line where the Israeli archaeologist is talking to the Catholic archaeologist. He says, "Look at the last Bible. 120 years, his eye had not dimmed, nor his natural force abated." In other words, he was still virile. He was still, and he turns to me, and the Israeli archaeologist says to the Catholic, "Ours is a, whatever,
gutsy religion.
Ours is a gutsy religion." Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So now let's take a look at continuing in Radak's commentary. And again, now here, Radak, who's normally, pretty much into Pshat, he's he's, trying to read in rabbinic tradition to Avraham's choices. Go on.
However, certainly he sought for himself a proper woman who would be a source of bitterness in his old age.
Oh, that's savage. Who would not?
Who would not be a source?
Oh boy, that's such a typo. What?
That makes
Sorry
a
about
big
that.
difference.
That's funny. We need a copy editor. That's really funny.
I do.
And he was careful that she not be a Canaanite. Hagar was Egyptian and not a Canaanite, and she was a wife to Abraham, as it was said. Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar and gave her to her husband Avram as a wife for him. Hagar was also a wife to him, as it says. Now Abraham had taken another wife. Aside from these, Abraham had many children from the concubines, but scripture mentions only the children of the wives. And the wives were through Nisuin, chuppah, and a wedding feast. But the concubines were through sexual intimacy alone.
And he goes on to bring in the rabbinic commentary.
Our rabbis, may their memory be a blessing, said a wife through ketubah and kiddushin, concubine without ketubah and without kiddushin. They also said keturah, this is Hagar. They derived this because they found concubines written without a yud.
Yeah, so instead of pilag shim with yud between the shin and the mem, they just have like pilag sham, which is, again, this is
Well, Leningrad does have a yud there, so I think basically this is just again.
well, but look how he finishes.
Written
okay. Sorry,
without a yud, but we find it written fully with a yud in all of the exacting books.
Yeah, those are careful books. So, he's just, again, he recognizes this is midrash. Midrash often comments on whether it is written, the Hebrew is written defectively, i.e., without an aim kriya, without a letter that is used to help in pronunciation, or with, Malay is full and Aser is without. So they often create a drash on that. And Radak mentions it, but it's interesting how he has to read rabbinic practice back into Avraham, because it's so. Now there's more to this our reading of this story. Because remember, this story, or the stories of Avraham and Sarah and Hagar, were not just interpreted by Jews. They also became central to Christianity. And early Christianity, which in many ways is an early commentary on Tanakh, they're reading it very, very differently. They
I assume Hagar's a big deal in the Quran, and
yeah, I didn't have a chance to look at the Quran, but I really was picking up, and I just found this very interesting. I wanted to share some of it. One of the articles on Torah.com, Observance or Faith, Jews and Christians Contend Over Abraham's Legacy. It's by Dr. Thomas R. Blanton, the fourth, and Professor Noah Benjamin Bickart. So, both a Jew and a non-Jew. And it's just very interesting. And what they argue is that in many ways, I'm not sure I totally buy it, but there are a lot of other articles that I haven't read. Newsmer has an article on Genesis Rabbah, the Midrash being a polemic in many cases. Another woman has got the specific article on this. So, it's a lot more to examine here. But that there are certain elements of early Christian writing that when you take a look at Bereshit Rabbah, at Genesis Rabbah, you wonder if they aren't reacting in some way to some of the things that are being said or are already known in Christianity. So, for example, I long believed in the new JPS Haggadah. I'm blanking on the Parshan there. I believe there's this, in the Haggadah, this tremendous emphasis on the fact that God took the Israelites out of Egypt. Not by a messenger, not by a fiery messenger, not by this, but the God himself. And then it's kind of repeated. And I believe that is a direct response to Jesus. Jesus is not the Savior, God is. And I think that, sometimes when we read our text, we have to realize they're not produced in a vacuum. So they point out Paul's letter to the Galatians, and in the New Testament addition to the books of the Gospels and Acts, you have a number of Pauline letters, not all of which were written by Paul, but these are some of the earliest texts.
And they're earlier than the Gospels.
Exactly,
Right.
Exactly.
I'm glad you said that, Professor Rabbi Zucker.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that they are earlier, so they're very important. So first of all, it's important to know what this letter to the Galatians is. This is from the old Oxford Annotated Bible, and I didn't have with me the Jewish annotated New Testament, which is a very interesting work. But at least an earlier edition talks about the letter to the Galatians, Magna Carta of Christian liberty. The letter to the Galatians deals with the question of whether a Gentile must become a Jew before he can become a Christian. Apparently, certain Judaizing teachers had infiltrated the churches of Galatia and Central Asia Minor, which Paul had founded. Again, Paul is early Christianity and Jesus' PR man, and he did an incredible job. For as much as we have the Gospels, Paul is really the one who, at least through his writing, seems to have created very much Christianity.
If you want a context on all of that, it's partly entertaining, but it partly tells you a little bit about. Read Kazantzakis, The Last Temptation of Christ.
Also,
where Kazantzakis presents that Jesus did not agree with how he's interpreted by Paul. But the point is that Paul is the maker of Christianity.
Yeah. And and you have various Jewish scholars have written on this as well. But let's just go on anyway. So these Judaizing teachers declaring that in addition to having faith in Jesus Christ as a Christian was obligated to keep the Mosaic law. This is an argument in early Christianity. Do you have to be shomer mitzvot or not? Paul insists on the contrary, that a man becomes right with God only by faith in Christ and not by the performance of good works, ritual observances, and the like, though, he adds on to say that doesn't mean he can just be morally lax, but the importance of this letter is written perhaps 55 CE, therefore earlier than the Gospels. The earliest gospel is Mark, which was written around the time of, just before, just after the revolt against Rome.
But not later, usually thought to be 75.
Yeah, I thought.
I agree with Rabbi Poppy.
Yeah, it's hard to know. They
Well,
put
if you regard the rending of the curtain of the temple, that has to be post 70.
All right,
Yeah.
guys, this really isn't fair to the rest of the of Rabbi Poppy's listeners. We're
Yeah,
we're off in the yeshiva.
Yeah, so anyway,
Yeah.
but it's important to recognize that through this particular letter, here are set forth with impassioned eloquence the true function of the Mosaic Law and its relation to God's grace manifested in Christ. And the declaration of the principles reiterated in these 6 chapters made Christianity a world religion instead of a Jewish sect. So basically, here is where he's really drawing a distinction that Christians don't have to be Jewish. They don't have to observe Jewish law. And they're it's based on faith in Christ as well. Here, let me here he's challenging, he's yelling at the Galatians, who's bewitched you. Uh, And he says, did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Um, you know, so again, I asked, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you by the works of the law or by your believing what you heard? So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. V'yamein Abraham v'yachshaveh le'tzedakah. And this was before circumcision. So, Paul's point is that Abraham accepts God in faith before circumcision, before the law. So those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. Well, actually, even before it says, Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All the nations will be blessed through you. So Paul's point is, look, God already promised Abraham that he would be a blessing. The nations will be blessed through, all the nations will be blessed through you. And that all this was done before there was circumcision. And it goes on. So he's basically, his point that Christ redeemed us from the law, and that, even the Gentiles, and before coming of the faith, we were held in custody under the law. Yeah. Anyway, let's just jump to this is relating to our parasha, our cycle of stories. Tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the slave woman, the other by a free woman. His son by the slave woman was born according to the flesh, but his son by the free woman was born as a result of divine promise. He's not totally saying it was through the Holy Spirit, but
it's sort of an allusion to Mary, right?
exactly. These things are being taken figuratively. The women represent 2 covenants. One covenant is from Mount Sinai and bears children who are to be slaves. This is Hagar. Now, Agar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present city of Yerushalayim because she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem that is above, Yerushalayim Shalmala, also an idea in Judaism, is that is above is free, and she is our mother. And then he quotes this beautiful line from Yeshayahu. Now you, brothers and sisters, like Isaac, are children of the promise. At that time, the sons born according to the flesh, persecuted by the son born by the power of the Spirit. It's the same now. Get rid of that slave woman or son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with this free woman's son. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman. So he's trying to say that, Avram and Sarah represent this true faith and not the slavishness to the law. And also in his letter to the Romans, he uses
So it's
this.
a little bit different than how Philo looks at it.
Yeah, exactly. Although they both use.
How does it go from Mount Sinai to Jerusalem? I'm a little in that verse 25.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that one either.
Okay.
That's
But
a little
I have
murky.
to say I don't. I just haven't done enough study in the New Testament yet. But here in Romans, he says. But if some of the branches were broken off, talking about a tree, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. In other words, that the root is Judaism and Torah, but ultimately some of his branches were cut off and you were grafted on because you are to be the new tree. But you can't be arrogant because you still have to remember your roots. And again, they were broken off because they're unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. And says that perhaps they too will be grafted back in for faith. But what's so interesting about all of this, let's see, they go, so we're running out of time here, so I'll just, quickly summarize here in Bereshit Rabbah, they they're commenting on taking another wife, and he first of all is connecting Psalm 1 with Avraham to say,
Oh, yeah, that looks beautiful.
yeah, it's
It
gorgeous
really
stuff.
does.
Yeah.
We'll give you a few minutes more if you want to read some of that. That's too good to let go,
I know, but
especially at my age.
yeah. And then he goes on. You had mentioned this, like a tree planted. Also in Psalm 1, he will be like a tree planted. The Blessed Holy One planted him in the land of Israel, which brings forth its fruit in season. This refers to Ishmael, and whose leaf does not wither. He's just going through the verses. This refers to Yitzchak, and whatever he does will prosper. This refers to the sons of Keturah, as it's stated. Now, Avram had taken another wife. Her name was Keturah. So here, the Midrash is saying, yes, we've got Ishmael, we've got Yitzchak, and we also have the children of Keturah. She's not so totally lost. It's not just she's outside. And going on with the Midrash, planted in the house of Hashem, they blossom in the courts of our God. They will continue to yield fruit even in old age. We know this psalm from Shabbat. This refers to Avram, our patriarch. They will remain full and fresh. Now, what's the image of Avraham here? That he is like
Great.
yeah, he's like a tree. So it's using the
An
same image.
evergreen tree, not a coniferous tree.
Right. If it is hewed, ikarate, it will yet regenerate. From Job. If he will say to him, perform kirot, the covenant of circumcision, it will regenerate. The constantly increased his performance of mitzvot and good deeds, and its roots will not cease. So all of this is emphasizing that the tree, it's still part of its strength is the circumcision. And, that even, Sarah dies, but Avram will continue because of the scent of mitzvot and good deeds, and there'll be many branches. And again, they bring
You're
that.
saying that the circumcision in some way increased his potency, or am I overreading the midrash?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that particular issue, but I think it's definitely a possibility.
Interesting.
So again, they're connecting this tree, even though it's cut down, still continues to blossom and flourish. And one of the examples is Avraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And coming back to this notion of her name, Rav said this is Hagar. Ravi Nehemiah said to him, but it is not written. Abraham took another, Vayosef, an additional. He said to him, that means only that he married her on the basis of the divine command. Da, 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 da. But he said to him, but is it not written? And her name was Keturah. He said to him, that is because she was perfumed, mikuteret, with mitzvot and good deeds. And he goes on to say how Hagar was really wound up in Jewish tradition. She was, that, even if Keturah was Hagar, she was still observing all of the mitzvot, and even if,
B'kuteret mar ulavana.
pardon me?
B'kuteret mar ulavana.
Right. And what's also remarkable, Bar Kapara at the end here said additions tosov to that are granted by the Blessed Holy One are even greater than the original item.
Well, that's what I was kidding around with Judith Howland. That there's a hint in this that Keturah isn't just somebody he picked up along the street somewhere. It's well, what you go on, Rabbi Pavi. I'm sorry, I got.
No, but I think that
Plus, this may
their
be
point here.
giving a big hecture to Gerim.
Yeah. And it is certainly very open, not as on and then they're also, first of all, in this article, they're talking about how Bereshit Rabbah, the rabbis subtly respond to Paul's claim that Abraham's greatness was based on faith by emphasizing that it was really based on his works and even performance of mitzvot, anchoring its claim to the passage about Abraham's marriage to Keturah after Sarah's death and all of their children. So it's just what I think is so fascinating. Is that and who is this new woman? The rabbi is saying it's none other than the one Spanish Hagar, a deeply clever response to the reading of Paul's interpreters that the Jewish Hagar was banished for the Christian Sarah. The Midrash is recycling a classic biblical theological trope in which the once rejected wife is taken back, as we know from Moshe and even Yechezkel.
Yirmiyahu chapter 3.
Right. The Midrash is arguing that in the wake of the destruction of the temple and the rise of a Christian empire, one might be tempted to see historical events as proof of the rejection of the Jews in favor of the church. No, says the Midrash, Judaism and the covenant based on observing commandments is alive and well. So their point is that this is subtly a polemic against what's being written in Christianity. And it's just something to think about when we read rabbinic literature that, as Jews are growing up in close proximity to Christianity, and Christianity is making its own claims, Judaism is in many ways responding to those claims.
Well, the biggest response is to say that the Avot kept all the mitzvot.
Right.
That's the single biggest response to Paul's argument.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there's no basis for that statement.
Right.
But just the same.
Even the argument, I think sometimes, are we going to have to observe mitzvot in Olam Haba or in, Yemot HaMashiach? And
well, that's two different things. Yemot HaMashiach are basically it's still
right.
this world.
Yeah.
No.
But the point is the mitzvot, are still important. They're probably, like I said, in the Haggadah, I think they're polemics against Jesus. There was one other example I was thinking about that has, but we've already, I think the point is clear that the rabbis often are responding to Christianity, not necessarily, by the way. This could simply be inner Jewish interpretation, but it's certainly a possibility. So something to think about in reading the stories of these women in this week's parasha.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Kavod.
Tודה רבה, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Be
Shabbat
well.
shalom לכולכם.
Sure.